Hello everyone and welcome to this Rnav approach tutorial in the Pmdg 737 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. As you will notice in this video, there's no game sounds because when I originally did this recording, my voice was really quiet, so I've decided to mute all them sounds and do a voiceover instead, so it's easier for you to hear. As you can see, we are currently at the top of descent and we are descending down into Anchorage, which is our airport today. We're going to be doing an Rnav approach into Anchorage, and as you can see, that's the start there of our Rnav approach, kind of like a localizer and glide slope in the ILS, and that is our first waypoint. So by that first waypoint, we want to be kind of fully configured for the Rnav, but not ready for landing. That needs to come just before kind of CANSI. Really, we need to be fully configured for landing. So as you can see, we've got our Rnav approach tuned in here, and it's all there, and we can see that is the glide path there, 3.16 degrees. So on the chart for this airport, you have to make sure that that is within 0.3 degrees of the descent path on the chart. If not, you have to discontinue the approach because it will be too because it won't be accurate enough, basically. But we are below 10,000 feet now, so let's go ahead and get the landing lights down, as you can see. And we will also get down the heads-up display. So if your aircraft has an heads-up display, I'd recommend using it for an Rnav approach. I'm currently in the Alaska Air Cargo, which does have a heads-up display. But I'm not going to be using that in this video, just in case your aircraft doesn't have it. I'll show you how to do it just using the PFDs, the primary flight displays. And if you want me to do another video on how to use the heads-up display instead, then I'll definitely be able to do that. So basically, we're descending now to 4,500 feet, and we want to make sure that we're kind of at that point by our first waypoint, so that then we can descend to 3,000, ready for the intercept for the actual Rnav approach. So we've also made sure that all our auto brake and everything like that is set, and we've got all our flap configuration and everything. So when we get close to the ground, basically we're going to disconnect the autopilot, and we're going to use the little magenta lines on the primary flight display, and that is called a flight director, which is going to help us down to the ground. We are also below transition level currently, so we're going to go ahead and set our altimeter, which is currently 2992, and we can make sure that that's set all the way down to landing. You need to check what the QNH is, or altimeter, depending on where you're flying. If you're in America, it'll be altimeter, otherwise it will be QNH, I believe. And make sure that's set below the transition level, which you can either get from the ATIS or from the chart. As you can see here, we've got the RMP progress. RMP is basically another way of saying Rnav. They basically mean the same thing, it's just a type of Rnav. There is another type of Rnav that I can't think of currently. I can't remember the name. Only certain aircraft can do it. But yeah, we're just going to do an RMP for today. So on the first officer's flight display here, for the navigation display, we're going to go ahead and set it ready for the Rnav approach. So we're going to keep R1 as it is, but we're going to change the first officers, which will be the pilot monitoring in real life. So what we're going to do is go ahead to the little knob there and click control, and that will take us to a different view here. But then we want to click it again, and that will take us to the Rnav view. So once you get closer to the ground, this will show us more, but basically this just shows us our descent path and all the different waypoints with their altitude limits, but kind of in an easier format for us to see. So we're coming up on our first waypoint now. We've just passed our first waypoint, so we're going to go ahead and get flaps 2. As you can see, that's the little flaps gauge. So you can see as it's moving towards number 2, that means that it's currently putting down flaps 2. We're going to keep descending now down to 3,000, ready for the intercept of the Rnav approach. Just like you would in a glide slope of an ILS, you need to have an intercept altitude, which in this approach is 3,000. Also, you want to make sure that also Lnav and Vnav is are currently being used, so that the plane will descend on the Vnav path down to the speed and altitude needed, but in time, basically. It basically has the whole approach coded into the plane, and so you can see that. I do also bring up the gear at this point because I'm not sure why the gear was down, to be honest. I don't really understand why that was down. I never put it down, but it seemed to be down, so I'll just take that up. We'll move on. We forget about that. We're going to imagine that never happened. So coming down to the FMC, then we're going to go to the approach ref, and as you can see, I've already got my flaps and speed selected, which is 40, flaps 40 and 121 knots. That's there in the flap/speed, just underneath there. But to select a different one, if you haven't done that yet, just click the soft key next to it. So you see I'm going to select that flaps 30, 124 knots, and then select the soft key next to flaps and speed, and it will input it there. And then your VNav will automatically go down to that speed once that flaps setting has been applied. I'm going to keep the legs page up for now, just so you can see what's kind of going on. You see the different things that are coming up and what it will most likely look like for your approach. Again, just checking the glide angle there, and you want to make sure it's in 0.3 degrees of the one on the chart. Again, that's quite an important thing, otherwise you might end up halfway down the runway when you should be at the start of the runway, or you might end up way before the runway. So you need to make sure it's accurate. In my case it is, so we're going to go ahead and continue with the approach. So as you can see, that is the airport there. We've got our go around route set as well, so we're going to go to Zuxen and then hold at UKEP, and that's going to be our go around in case we need to do a go around. And you can also see our waypoint coming up here that we need to be at 3,000 feet by. So at this point, we are on flaps 5. We've gone back down to flaps 5, and as you can see, that first officer's flight display is showing a bit more now. So it's showing the waypoints and their altitude limits. If there's a speed limit as well, it would be showing that. And you can also see the green bit at the bottom. That is the ground, so we can see the ground there. I can see how far away we are from the ground. So we're going to continue our descent now. As you can see, I've just tuned in 1,600 in the altitude. So that when ready, the plane will start to descend down to 1,600 because that is the altitude point for our next waypoint, which is Kanzi. I need to be at 1,600 for that. So when ready, the plane will start to descend, which it's doing now. It's going to descend by Kanzi. It needs to be at 1,600 by Kanzi. Also, as you'll notice, the speed is coming down by itself because we are on VNav. VNav also manages the speed, so it's quite good for doing approaches and things because you have, the plane has control of the speed using what you've put into the FMC. As you can see, green light there on flaps 10. So now we've got flaps 10 down. So in a bit, we're going to put down the landing gear and flaps 15. As you can see, we've passed that waypoint now, so we're going to start descending again. The descent did stop for a minute. It just descended about 100 feet because obviously that waypoint is still there. But now we've gone past that waypoint, the plane will start to descend down to 1,600 for Kanzi, because that's the altitude limit for that. Altitude limits are a big thing, obviously, and as you can see, that little banana, kind of green banana shaped thing, that is showing where or at what point in our flight plan we will reach a selected altitude. So as you can see, we're going to reach the altitude at Kanzi, which means that the autopilot is all working well. As you can see, it's moving about a bit, but it'll always do that on final approach. It's because of winds. There we go, to stop the landing gear now, and we've got flaps 15 down as well. So now we could land in this configuration. Obviously we've got more to do, need to go down to flaps 40 and also decrease the speed quite a bit. But as you can see, we have the landing gear down, and yeah, we are basically ready for landing nearly. Just a few more things to do. So as you can see, the plane is now, as you would be on an ILS, on the glide slope and the localizer. For an Rnav approach, you basically have an artificial localizer and glide slope, which is basically just tuned in to the plane anyway. It's in the plane system. So it's basically exactly the same, but you need to do a little bit more. And with an Rnav approach, you cannot auto land because an Rnav is non-precision. So what we're going to do here is set the landing altitude of the airport. So this is the elevation of the airport, which you can find on the charts for the airport. If you don't know how to find charts for an airport, I'll put a link in the description to what I use. I use a website called ChartFox. It's really good. It's free. It's great for VATSIM. If you want to do some VATSIM flying, obviously you need charts for VATSIM. So that's what I use. Obviously, you can use things like Navigraph, but they do cost money. So it's a good free option. If you want to get some charts, I'd definitely recommend ChartFox. Anyway, going back down. Going back to the video now, you can see we're getting ready to land still. We're going to decrease the altitude so that we keep descending past Kanzi. Otherwise, we'd just stay at 1,600, which obviously we don't want to do. So I've decided it's 400 for now, because that's roughly the elevation of the airport. So you want to do it to the nearest 100, basically. I'm just going to set that as 400 so that we start to descend towards the airport. And then a bit later on, we'll set it to our go-around altitude, which is 3,000 feet. Again, you can find that on the charts. As also, we've now set flaps 20, so we can fly at a slower speed, and we can start to get more towards flaps 40. As you can see, they've got a bit of a traffic warning on our display, but there's no RA advisories because the traffic is not in the air, it's actually on the ground at the airport, so we can ignore that. As you can see, it kind of flashes on and off a little bit, but it's fine, we can ignore that because we're coming up to an airport, so most likely that traffic is on the ground, unless we get specific instructions from the plane to go around due to traffic. We will not be doing any of that. Okay, so as you can see here, I turn off the autopilot and I'll start manually flying. You do have to do that in an Rnav. I chose to disconnect the autopilot about 1,000 feet above the ground. It all changes due to visibility and the airline you're flying for, if you're flying in real life. But for the sim, I always seem to disconnect at about 1,000 feet. And then, as you can see, we just bring it slowly down to the runway. You've got a touchdown there, so you bring down the reverse thrust. We can start to slow down. We've got a bit of a float there because a bit of an uneven runway. That's fine, we can move on from that. So let's bring the front nose down and then we can get some reverse thrust. And we can begin to slow the plane down. We've got 60 knots there, so we're going to bring the reverse thrust off. I'm just going to use the braking. And then here we take over on manual braking, turn off the auto brake, and there you go. You've just completed an Rnav approach. So I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please do consider subscribing. It's free and it helps me out a lot. And also please consider liking the video. It helps this video to reach more people and help more people. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again shortly. Bye bye.